And it was just transformative to see so much more money coming back into our communities and farmers able to stay on the land and not have to immigrate, stay on the land, keep their kids in school, feed their family 3 times a day rather than only eating twice a day. We were digging wells and bringing clean drinking water into villages for the first time. We created scholarship programs. We created health programs. We reforested areas that had been deforested a generation earlier by lumber companies. In short, we did all of this really amazing social and environmental work, and thanks to nobody's charity, thanks to no government program, all thanks to this really simple idea of a fair price for a great product. And that's what led me from anti-capitalist to what some call social capitalist, right? And realizing that it is possible to harness the power of the market, to harness the power of consumer choice to help farmers on a journey out of poverty.
That's today's guest, Paul Rice, talking about his new book, Every Purchase Matters, which is all about the fair trade movement, which he was actually instrumental in starting here in the United States. We had a great conversation, which you'll hear in just a moment. You're listening to Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast, a co-production of Radio Cafe and Quivira Coalition. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. Our program will begin right after these 2 quick announcements. Quivira Coalition has built out a busy spring workshop calendar. We've got soil health workshops happening in New Mexico and Colorado, an on-the-land gathering at Red Canyon Reserve near Magdalena, New Mexico, and a virtual fencing webinar. Check out Quivira's events page at quiviracoalition.org/events, and Quivira is Quivira. Save the date for Regenerate 2025 at the Santa Fe Convention Center, November 5th through 7th. This year's conference, Cultivating Adaptability, will highlight how people from all walks of life are responding to and igniting change through land management practices that help them work in partnership with nature, engaging communities to work together to pool resources and talents, and adapting to changing markets and climates. So mark your calendars. If you would like to be notified when we open registration, sign up for the Regenerate email list at regenerateconference.com. We hope to see you in Santa Fe. And now to our program. I'm delighted to welcome Paul Rice. He's founder of Fair Trade USA, where he was CEO for 26 years. He's winner of many awards for social and ethical innovation, and he's author of the new book, Every Purchase Matters, How Fair Trade Farmers, Companies, and Consumers Are Changing the World, which you can find at paulrice.org. Welcome to Down to Earth.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Great to see you. Well, our listeners can't see you, but I can see you here on Zoom. You were very much an activist and kind of an anti-capitalist in college, as you write about in your book. And after graduation, you moved to Nicaragua and got involved in organizing coffee growers who were really the poorest of the poor. Tell us about that part of your life, what you did, what you learned, because that really propelled you into the whole fair trade journey.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I moved to Nicaragua in 1983, wanting to work with farmers, and I ended up getting hired to work on a number of different well-intentioned, well-funded aid programs that, were very kind of characteristic of the international aid field. We were organizing farmers into co-ops. We were running training programs to help them boost their yields. So the whole approach to poverty alleviation was, let's teach farmers how to produce 2 tons of coffee per acre rather than 1 ton, right? It was very much a production-focused strategy. And honestly, after doing that for a bunch of years, I kind of came to the conclusion that that top-down aid-dependent approach often is just not very effective. And in part, it's not effective because we weren't teaching farmers how to navigate the market, right? We were teaching them how to boost their volume, but not teaching them how to sell that harvest at a better price. And so it was kind of, it was an interesting learning journey for me into international aid. And it eventually led me to fair trade.
You started working with and organizing co-ops in Nicaragua. Talk about that, like how they worked.
So co-ops are very common all over the world, including here in the US. You may not know it, but Sun-kissed oranges is a farmer-owned co-op. And Ocean Spray Cranberries is a farmer-owned co-op. And Diamond Almonds, farmer-owned co-op. So we have a great tradition of farmer-owned co-ops here in the U.S. as well. Essentially, the premise is if you're a small farmer, you don't have the scale, you don't have the volume in order to add value and market directly. And so farmers come together. We were organizing thousands of 1 acre, 2 acre farmers, but coming together in groups of that size, they had the cumulative volume to create economies of scale. So we were teaching them how to process their own coffee and how to export direct. And when I heard about fair trade for the first time in 1990, the call to action was very simple. Their slogan was trade, not aid. And their premise was if farmers could just export direct, fair trade buyers could pay them more, and that would dramatically improve their lives, and they wouldn't have any need for foreign aid. And so that's what really captured my imagination. And in the summer of 1990, after having been in Nicaragua already for 7 years, I started Nicaragua's first fair trade coffee co-op. 24 brave souls who came together. We filled one container, shipping container of coffee. We exported to a Boston-based group called Equal Exchange, and they paid us over $1 a pound for our coffee at a time when the local market price was 10 cents a pound.
Oh my goodness.
So literally 10 times more money for our farmers simply because they were able to come together, form a co-op, add value, and export direct.
And eliminate the middleman.
Exactly. Export direct, meaning jumping over actually 3 or 4 layers of middlemen. So that was like a light bulb going off for me. And over the next 4 years, I led that co-op. We grew it to 3,000 families. We were exporting hundreds of containers of coffee by the 4th year. And fair trade was up and running in Europe. There was really only a couple of companies here in the US at the time, like Equal Exchange, but the fair trade movement in Europe was really scaling. And so that's where we focused. And it was just transformative to see so much more money coming back into our communities and farmers able to stay on the land and not have to immigrate, stay on the land, keep their kids in school, feed their family 3 times a day rather than only eating twice a day. We were digging wells and bringing clean drinking water into villages for the first time. We created scholarship programs. We created health programs. We reforested areas that had been deforested a generation earlier by lumber companies. In short, we did all of this really amazing social and environmental work, and thanks to nobody's charity, thanks to no government program, all thanks to this really simple idea of a fair price for a great product. And that's what, led me from anti-capitalist to what some call social capitalist, right? And realizing that it is possible to harness the power of the market, to harness the power of consumer choice to help farmers on a journey out of poverty.
And, the journey out of poverty, the way you describe it, it's so affecting because there are things like, public school was free for the children of those farmers, but they had to have shoes. And people couldn't afford shoes. They had to have, school uniforms or some kind of clothes. They had to be able to afford books. This was not a lot of money by our standards, but
Right.
For them, it was the difference between their kids being educated and not.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the time, it cost about $200 a year to keep a kid in school. And that was the cost of, to your point, like shoes. Like school was free, but shoes weren't, and kids weren't allowed into the classroom unless they had shoes on their feet. So shoes, uniforms, books, bus money. It was only $200 a year. But for a poor family, that $200 a year cost was like a wall locking generations of kids out of a better education and a better future. And so one of the things that our co-op did right away was set up a scholarship fund, a $200 a year per kid scholarship fund so that kids could stay in school, get through high school, and many of them ended up going on to college.
And some of those stayed in their communities. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to read the book because it's just full of great stories. And storytelling is very much part of this, which I want to talk to you about. But let's continue with your journey. So you were there for 11 years, and it seemed like it was kind of your spiritual home. But at a certain point, you decided to come back, go to business school, and then you started Fair Trade USA. Yeah. And this was in the 1990s when... Yeah. especially as you say, I mean, Europe was a little further advanced and probably still is, but fair trade, people hadn't really heard of it. You were taking a big risk into what was for many American consumers the unknown.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, the move from Nicaragua back to the US was very much inspired by these 4 years of, you know, basically having a front row seat on this journey of empowerment of these 3,000 families and realizing that the market could be a powerful force for good. Not in a Pollyanna, automatically, apologistically for capitalism and its evils kind of way, but no, if you learn how to grab the capitalist bull by the horns, right, you can ride it. You can help farmers and workers on a journey out of poverty. And I saw it, I witnessed it, I felt it. And so at the end of that time, I felt a calling and a duty to come back and see if I could translate that European experience of fair trade to the US. So that, yeah, as you mentioned, I moved back in 94. I got an MBA. I started Fair Trade USA in 98. And Fair Trade USA is a nonprofit. Our mission is to fight poverty and protect the environment. And we do that through fair trade certification, right? So fair trade is a philosophy, it's a movement, it's also a standard, like an organic standard, right? So it's a 200-point checklist of social, labor, and environmental criteria, which farms and factories have to adhere to and get audited against every year in order to be certified. And then once that farm is certified, they're allowed to sell their product, coffee, bananas. We certify factories now, so t-shirts, like all those products, get to wear that fair trade certified label. And our market partners, and here's the punchline, here's what makes fair trade unique. Our market partners, companies like Whole Foods and Patagonia and even Costco and Walmart today, they agree to pay more money, right? So in other words, the premise or the motto is not, hey, farmers and work and factory owners, produce more sustainably and good luck figuring out how to cover the cost of that, right? Now, that's not the message. The message is produce more sustainably and the market will reward you. And we've been able to create a model where companies are willing to pay more back to these communities for meeting the fair trade standard. And that cumulatively, that above market premium, which we call our impact premium, it's now more than $1.2 billion. So that's what we've been able to channel since we started, $1.2 billion in funds back to more than 1 million farmers and workers in 70 countries around the world.
So, what that looks like in real life is the consumer pays whatever per pound for coffee, and then there's another 10 or 20 cents on top of that for fair
Right.
trade coffee. And that money goes directly back to communities. What are some of the things that the communities have done with that money, and what is the decision process for how to spend that money?
Mm. So the fair trade premium is controlled by the farmers in their co-op, or if it's a larger farm or a factory, it's controlled by the workers. And it is their choice on how to invest that money in their community. And so we see all kinds of amazing projects. Typically, the farmers or the workers will conduct what we call a needs assessment. They'll survey everyone in the community. They'll ask, what are your most pressing needs, health or education, or production infrastructure or housing. And based on that needs assessment, then they'll identify projects and then they vote. And every year they get to vote. And, a given community might have as much as $100,000 a year. And so they vote and they deploy that for amazing projects like the scholarship program that we talked a minute ago, or in other communities, clean water projects. For example, we have a program with 15,000 small coffee farmers in Colombia, and Nespresso is the buyer. And through that partnership, they've been able to bring clean water into their communities, benefiting over 100,000 people now. They had running water, but it was contaminated. And so what they did was they put filtration systems in to basically clean up the water supply. And as you know, when you clean up the water supply, you improve health indicators dramatically. So, we're really seeing incredible outcomes. And it's all based on, this notion that the farmers and the workers themselves have agency and know their needs best. So it's not you or me or Nespresso in that case, telling them, oh, you need to clean up your water supply. We're going to send you money to do that, right? It's the farmers themselves doing the needs assessment, identifying their top priorities, and then taking these fair trade impact funds and investing them, in those projects that address their most pressing needs. It's incredibly inspiring to me, not just because, the before and after is dirty water before and now clean water after, but it's the process itself of doing the needs assessment, debating the needs, voting on the projects, and then discussing and evaluating the impact of the projects afterwards. All that's done by the community. So what we're talking about is, in many ways, grassroots democracy building, right? Where communities are in charge of their own development and developing the skills of democratic process and project management, developing the skills to effectively manage these funds. And that, of course, then has a transcendental impact on their ability in general to develop their communities, to negotiate with government, to negotiate with outside actors. So that it's another of the kind of key elements of the fair trade model, this fact that or this aspect of agency and empowerment, if you will.
Right, right. It's, I mean, I think that's such a huge piece that it's, and I'm glad you talked about it because, I mean, when you're feeling defeated by the man or by the system or whatever, it's really hard to know what to do. And when you have agency, you can you can move mountains. I wanted to ask you about the agriculture piece of it.
Yeah.
Were the farmers also growing food that they ate themselves? In other words, were they able to sustain themselves on their farms? And were they using, regenerative practices on the coffee growing farms like whatever, agroforestry, cover crops, compost, water conservation structures, healthy
Yeah.
soil? Were you seeing all that kind of stuff? And is that part of the whole fair trade conversation?
It is, yeah. I think of our farmers as being regenerative before we knew the term regenerative.
Right.
But you first asked, were they producing their own food? And that is the typical model of agro-export farmers, smallholder farmers around the world. In other words, typically a 1 or 2 acre coffee farmer also has an acre of corn and beans for their own household consumption. The farmers that I organized in Nicaragua, they were all producing their own food. Typically an acre of corn and beans, some mango trees in the front yard, some avocado trees in the backyard, a dozen chickens and a pig for Christmas, right? I mean, that was, and then, in addition to all that, an acre of coffee. So, fair trade has always supported food security and food self-reliance. We've never advocated for farmers going 100% into an agro-export crop, even though through fair trade they're getting more money for that coffee or whatever the agro-export crop is, cocoa or tea or anything else, because producing your own food has proven to be vital for survival strategies for farmers historically. And in one village that I visited not too long ago in Honduras, the coffee farmers there had taken fair trade impact premium money and used it to buy small on-farm grain silos for every farmer in the co-op, right? Because what happens is if you're growing your own corn and then you're just storing it on the cob on your living room floor, which is historically the case, you lose a lot to weevils and to mice. And so they were investing in, small, I think, 1 ton grain silos, affordable and maintained at the farm level, and that allowed them to strengthen food security with the money from fair trade. So it just shows how, I don't know, how symbiotic, if you will, food and agro-export crop production can be in the smallholder setting. So anyway, to your question about regenerative practices, so many of our farmers are agroforestry farmers. Pretty much all of our fair trade coffee and fair trade cacao, and those are two of our biggest products, globally speaking, in terms of acreage. those are agroforestry crops. So, the farmers typically will thin the forest and plant coffee or cacao under the canopy. They're terracing and they're allowing leaves to reincorporate into the soil. Often they're planting cover crops that suppress weeds so that they don't have to use any kind of herbicide or hand weed. 70% of all fair trade farmers are also certified organic. So there's a strong environmental component of the fair trade standard itself. And then many go above and beyond and implement organic practices and agroforestry practices and so on. So now that regenerative is becoming a thing in the market, and many fair trade buyers here in the US are asking the farmers if they're interested in getting regenerative certified or somehow in demonstrating that, beyond organics, demonstrating their environmentally friendly practices, if you will, their climate smart practices. And so it's been an easy leap for many of our farmers to get ROC certified and to kind of demonstrate that they're meeting those kinds of criteria.
What are the various products offered with fair trade labels besides coffee, which is well known, and chocolate, cocoa, that kind of thing? What else is being certified?
Yeah, we certify thousands of products now. I mean, it's really interesting to see the expansion of fair trade into all kinds of industries, and that has happened because those industries have seen the model work in our core products like coffee and cocoa, and they've come to us and said, "Hey, can you extend the model to coconut or to dairy or to seafood or apparel?" So, yeah, I mean, pretty much anything you can eat or drink, we're certifying it or it's in the pipeline. Coffee is still number one. It's the highest volume fair trade product. It accounts for about 40% of all fair trade product sales here in the US currently. But in addition, sugar and cocoa, tea, all kinds of fresh fruits and vegetables, from mangoes and bananas to Dole pineapples and Driscoll's blueberries. And most recently, we've started expanding in the manufactured area. So starting with apparel, but of course, we work with Patagonia and J. Crew. Now we're working in furniture with Pottery Barn and in cosmetics with Elf Beauty. So it's really interesting to see the model expand from agriculture into the manufacturing sector. And we also now certify farms and factories here in the U.S. Historically, the model was really focused on, what used to be called the third world, the developing world, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, because we were all about fighting poverty, right? And so you take the model to the poorest countries in the world, and that's where we focused. But about 8 years ago, some US farmers came to us and said, "Hey, guess what? We've got terrible farm labor conditions here in the US, and we think fair trade can help." And so we've started certifying farms and factories here in the US now. And I really love that program. According to Human Rights Watch, 40%, 40% of agricultural labor in the United States lives below the poverty line. So we
Yeah.
need fair trade and things like it here in the US as much as anywhere.
One of the things that's so interesting about this work to me, I mean, you write about the movement away from extractive toward regenerative capitalism. And when I hear non extractive capitalism, I sort of like I think, well, there's an oxymoron for you. And I mean, especially not, your small to mid sized farmer, and the co-ops of the kind you were talking about, but those large corporations that are fixated on shareholder profit and that are still engaged in union busting and paying wages that are so low that people are on Section 8 housing and food stamps, and so instead of whatever Walmart paying their salaries, the taxpayer is chipping in for that, which
Right.
and so here you are talking about regenerative capitalism, and I know, like, one can tell, and you say it yourself in your book, you are an optimist,
Yeah.
but realistically, like, what are you seeing? What is the potential for that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm certainly aware that when when I use the term or when others use the term conscious capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, that there's some healthy skepticism out there about that and some eye rolling. And that would have been me too, some time ago, because I think there is something inherent in capitalism about the profit motive. And, there's an imperative to maximize returns for shareholders. And that has been rightly characterized as corporate greed, right? Like exploit the planet, exploit the worker as much as you can in order to make shareholders rich. That was the capitalism of the past. It is still very much the capitalism of today, in many, in many industries and by many companies. I'm not saying it isn't, but what I am saying is that capitalism is evolving. And I have certainly experienced it and been a part of that evolution over the last 40 years since, I went to Nicaragua in 1983 and then started this fair trade co-op in 1990. And in 1990, here in the US, very few companies cared about supply chains or the workers or the environment on the other end of their supply chain. And very few companies thought that American consumers would pay 2 cents a pound, 2 cents a cup more for a cup of coffee that helped some third world farmer that they would never meet, right? There was just profound skepticism about both the supply chain and the consumer interest, the supply chain need or the consumer interest in something like fair trade. Fast forward to today, it is very clear that more and more corporate leaders are seeing supply chain transparency as essential to their success. And COVID underscored this because there was so much supply chain disruption during COVID. And many companies realized that if they didn't get that transparency and that traceability back to the original supplier, and then have a way to transfer funds back to those suppliers so they could stay in business, that the companies themselves were at risk. I mean, think about it. A high-end coffee company, and we don't work with Folgers or Maxwell House. They don't have ethical sourcing at Folgers and Maxwell House. The low-end companies often don't do anything. That's business as usual. It's the dark side of business. It comes at the expense of farmers and workers in the environment, for sure, right? But high-end coffee depends on high quality beans. Well, who's growing the high quality beans? It's the 1 acre farmer in the mountains of Honduras or Nicaragua or Ethiopia. And if that farmer, is not getting enough money for her harvest to be able to produce that quality, it means that the company here, Starbucks or Peet's or Nespresso or whoever, they're at risk, right? So there's a shared interest between the farmer and the brand. And that has led to an evolution of capitalism. It's led to companies rethinking their supply chain strategies and realizing that to have access, to be successful as a business and to have access to high quality, reliable raw materials and commodities, they need to somehow bring the farmer and the ecosystem into the equation. And so, I believe that today, anywhere from a third to a half of all business leaders are starting to look at supply chains through this lens and trying to future proof their supply chains by getting more transparency, getting more resources back to the original producers in order to be able to stay in business. And fair trade isn't the only model of that, but we're part of this growing movement that I call ethical sourcing. And I haven't even talked about the consumer, right? That's just the supply chain piece of it. Then there's the consumer piece of it. And that is really interesting. It's very clear that over the last 30, 40 years, consumers are increasingly reading the label, right? Where we want to know, is this product healthy? Is it safe for me to eat? And then, it's a short leap from there to, wait, what's the environmental impact of this product? And is there child labor in this product? So I think there's a growing awareness among consumers that products have impacts and that we can affect change, if you will. We can support social and environmental sustainability through the product choices that we make. And millennials and Gen Z consumers index particularly high in terms of their expectations of corporate behavior in this regard. So that has led many companies to start to offer sustainable products because they want to tap into that market. So, at the end of the day, are we there yet? No, hell no. I mean, business as usual is still the dominant model of capitalism. The words that you use, exploitative and extractive, that is still very much the order of the day. And there's an evolution, and we see it all around us in companies large and small that are starting to rethink their business models and starting to incorporate sustainability into their businesses in a way that's driving an evolution. And so I think of the long arc of history. I think of how far we've come over the last 30 years in capitalism. And then I think, okay, well then 30 years from now, will ethical sourcing be the new normal? And I think it will be.
It's interesting. I was thinking as I was reading this book that, corporations see fair trade as a cost to them, and it does cost them. But I mean, does it always cost them, and will it always cost them? And I'm saying this because I was
Mm,
talking to some farmers the other day who do regenerative ranching, and
mm,
environmental practices for them are not a cost. They're a benefit. They're a financial benefit to their farm
yeah,
because the healthier the soil is, the more forage they have, and then the more animals per acre they can raise, and then the more money they make.
right.
And it also means, there's more water in the soil. There's zero input costs for fertilizer and farm chemicals and things
Yeah,
like that. The animals are healthy, the workers are healthy, the workers stay. So for them, environmental and regenerative agriculture is a big, huge bottom line benefit. There's
right.
no downside.
Right.
And I just wondered, are you making that argument, or is there that argument to be made in the sort of fair trade pitch?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love that you raised that. I would say that historically, our pressure points were on the market side. In other words, the way that we grew the fair trade movement was by approaching brands and retailers and engaging them around the value that they could achieve through fair trade, either in terms of supply chain security or brand differentiation and the ability to tap into the growing conscious consumer segment. And it's only been in more recent years that we've been starting to collect data around the impact of fair trade practices for the farm owners and the factory owners, and to measure the impact that it's having, not just in terms of more money going back to their workers, which enables all kinds of great outcomes in terms of health and education and clean water and housing. All that we've tracked. But what we haven't tracked are things like labor productivity or labor retention versus turnover, right? And so we
Right.
started to track that recently. Last week, I had a great conversation with Rodolfo Spielman. He's the CEO of a brand called Nature Sweet. Nature Sweet is the leading brand of snacking tomatoes, those delicious, bursts of flavor snacking tomatoes that come in that distinctive packaging that you've seen everywhere because they're sold everywhere. And they went 100% fair trade a few years ago. And he was just articulating to me that one of the reasons why they shifted to 100% fair trade wasn't just because Walmart and Whole Foods were supporting that, but also because what they found was that their labor retention went way, way up. In fact, he said to me that their labor retention rates were 8 times the industry average. So
Wow.
think of this, it's a seasonal tomato harvest. At the end of the harvest, the workers go home. And then, a month or two later, when they come back for the new season, every year, a lot of people just don't come back. They go to some other job or they immigrate. And so, what he's saying is that his labor retention or the return rate of his workers is 8 times the industry average. Well, what that means is he's spending less money recruiting new workers. He's spending less money training new workers. He has higher productivity, labor productivity, because overall he has a much more veteran, seasoned workforce. And so what he said to me was fair trade and the premium and all of the benefits that come with being fair trade certified has made our business much more attractive, which means we're retaining our workers, which means we are more successful as a brand. And so that kind of speaks to your point about the value of adopting regenerative farming practices being intrinsic to the farm owner themselves. I'm, drawing a similar comparison that adopting fair trade is allowing farm owners and factory owners to retain labor, among other things, boost productivity and so on. And that creates value for them, even without kind of the market pull effect.
The tomato example that you gave, was that located in Mexico, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah. So, this is all an incredibly fascinating and important way of doing business and really fostering the evolution toward regenerative capitalism that you're talking about. And I wondered if you could address the relative merits of encouraging, for example, voluntary certifications like fair trade and organic and so on, versus government mandated fair practices for things like labor and environmental protection.
Yeah. So I I get asked, you know, what's the end game for fair trade all the time? And I think regulation is one scenario, but we're moving in the opposite direction here in the US, right? I mean, the US government
Yeah.
is rapidly deregulating and eliminating protections for workers and for the environment. And so private sector voluntary models like fair trade have a really important role to play. Now, maybe eventually, you know, when I talk about the long arc of history, maybe 30 years from now, there will be legislation in the US that mandates that companies guarantee that workers and farmers around the world get a living wage. Maybe. But, you know, in the meantime, what are we doing? And how, and, you know, more importantly, in my mind, how can we evolve capitalism? How can we engineer a model of capitalism that overcomes the trade-off mentality of the past, where either you could be profitable or you could be sustainable, but you couldn't be both? That's what I call the trade-off mentality. And I think what we're seeing now is, you know, the smart capitalists realizing that you can be sustainable and profitable, that sustainability can actually drive positive results for the firm. And so they're joining things like fair trade out of enlightened self-interest. And does that mean that regulation isn't needed? No, of course regulation is needed. And I would love to see a day when every farmer and worker is guaranteed by law to get a living wage. But in the meantime, I see huge opportunity right now to harness the power of the market and harness the power of enlightened self-interest, if you will, in order to lift people out of poverty and protect the planet.
I mean, it's such a, when one talks about everything being interconnected, I mean, when we talk about a living wage, if you raise the living wage and generally did what is necessary to reduce the just surreal inequality that we have in this country,
Yeah.
that would not only allow, farmers in, I mean, we can talk about farmers in other countries, but I mean, consumers in this country just simply being able to make the choice to buy fair trade food,
Right.
which, whether it's regenerative, organic, fair trade, whatever. And right now, I would say probably about half the country is literally struggling to get by, and being a conscious consumer is a luxury.
Yeah, I'm aware of that argument, obviously, and I would challenge it. I think the notion that sustainable products need to cost more is being disproven in the market. And I look at this in my book actually a lot. You know, in a chapter that I entitle "Who Pays for Sustainability?" You know, the question for a long time has been, or the answer I should say for a long time has been, the consumer pays for sustainability. And if you look at the cost, or sorry, the retail price of organic bananas versus conventional bananas, you'll see that markup right there. So consumers have been educated to believe that, you know, to get an organic item, you need to pay a little bit more. And of course, over time, as volume has gone up, that differential has come down. That price differential has come down. So organic products are more and more affordable today, but they're still priced above their conventional counterpart. In the case of fair trade, though, it's interesting. A lot of fair trade products don't cost more than their conventional counterparts. So, you know, we just talked about, for example, Nature Sweet tomatoes. When they converted their tomatoes to fair trade, they didn't raise the price. And they were able to channel the extra 2 cents per pound back to their workers precisely because of that benefit that I referred to around labor retention and productivity. So if we look at other products, Elf Beauty, for example, my daughter Camila was just telling me last night that Elf Beauty was the very first cosmetics brand that she bought as a teenager in high school. And Elf Beauty recently joined our cause, and they're almost 100% fair trade now. They didn't raise the price of their cosmetics. And I asked Tarang Amin, who's a brilliant visionary, he's the CEO of the company. I asked him when I was interviewing him for the book, why didn't you raise the price to the consumer? Did you take a hit in your profits? And he said, no, 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 not at all. He said, fair trade has helped us grow the brand, it's helped us grow the volume. And by virtue of that higher volume, we've been able to maintain our profit margins. So
Yeah.
we're paying farmers more and we're not charging consumers more.
Very
So, I
interesting.
mean, it's very true that many Americans are struggling to put food on the table. Inflation has hit us hard. People are concerned about their own family well-being, their own family economics. That is absolutely true. And it is also true that you can get fair trade certified products at Walmart, right? That you can get fair trade certified products that don't cost more than the non-fair trade alternative. And so I think that is one of the things that really inspires me about this next chapter of capitalism, that it will be possible for more responsible, sustainable products to be available to the masses, not just to people with discretionary income.
I mean, one of the fundamental problems of capitalism, and it's funny because I mean, I knew you many years ago, Paul, and you were like to me the big anti-capitalist activist, and I hadn't gotten there, and it's I feel like I've almost reversed roles with you. But like, okay, let's talk about capitalism and its imperative for economic growth on a finite planet. I mean, and we Americans we consume so much. We consume
Yeah,
so much that we don't need. We consume so much more per capita than Europeans
yeah.
in every way. And it's all part of economic growth. But is growth always a desirable thing? I mean, how do you think about that?
No, I get the argument and I sympathize with it. And I guess, in our movement, we have not had much success telling people buy less coffee, help the world, buy fewer bananas. People are going to buy coffee and bananas. And so I support, the movements that are trying to right size consumption levels and certainly to recycle and reuse and all of that. And, the reality is that 70% of Americans drink coffee and they're going to drink coffee tomorrow and they're going to drink coffee the next day. And so the question isn't really, can we convince them to drink less coffee so that maybe, that acreage could go to something more sustainable, but rather, how can we make coffee sustainable? How can we make bananas sustainable and good for the worker as well as good for the land? So, we're all right. I just have chosen this movement as the way I know best to impact the most farmers and workers around the world and to help protect the farmland and the forests around their farmland and to give consumers a really easy way to vote with their dollars. And I think that's, ultimately right now with so many people in this country feeling so unhappy with everything that Donald Trump is doing and the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Accords or on climate and all those things, right? So many people are upset and feeling powerless. And my book, Every Purchase Matters, is a call to action because, listen, you don't have to wait 4 years to vote for change. You can vote for change this afternoon when you go to the supermarket. You can vote with your dollars by buying sustainable products, whether it's regenerative or organic or fair trade or whatever. You have a chance to choose a product that is consistent with your values and that helps protect the world. And look, the business community is listening. They follow consumer signals really quickly. So the more we buy, the more they're going to want to provide in terms of sustainable products. And at the same time, every vote, not just every purchase matters, every vote matters, every voice matters. We still need to be in the streets. We still need to be voting. We still need to do everything that we can to reverse the backward policies that are, being forced on us. And just know that your product choices make a difference.
So much of your job is storytelling, and part of that has to do with closing the gap between the people who, for example, know about fair trade, which is 2/3 of people, and the people who actually really are committed to buying fair trade products. And I have to say, I mean, that goes for me. Having read this book, I've known about fair trade, but I'm more likely now to actively look for that label on things when I shop. What are your
Mhm.
hopes for this book, for the movement? And especially now in the current political climate, for really making the world a better place for farmers and consumers.
Yeah. I wrote the book for two audiences. First, for a business audience that may be thinking about supply chains in a different way, thinking about sustainability in a different way, and just not knowing how to incorporate ethical sourcing and sustainability and regeneration into their business models. And so this book is the untold story of the fair trade movement, and it looks at fair trade kind of like a learning lab where we learned a lot from the successes, but also from the failures of the last 26 years. And so I'm hoping that by sharing those stories very transparently and with a lot of humility, that will kind of shine a light on the path of conscious capitalists who are trying to figure out how to bring purpose into their business. So that's one audience. And then the second audience is the general consumer who, as you pointed out, 67% of American consumers have seen the fair trade certified label on a product. So we have really high awareness of the label, but we're also aware that understanding is much lower and purchasing is much lower. A lot of people don't know. I mean, okay, fair trade, that sounds good, but I'm not sure what it means. Or, yeah, I see that label, but I'm not really actively looking for it yet. And so the book seeks to engage the consumer and to illuminate the impact that each of us can have through our purchasing decisions by kind of talking about the stories of impact. There are a lot of stories in this book. I hope people will find it a fun read, as well as, an insightful read, because there are just so many great stories in there of the impact that we're all having when we buy roses or coffee or t-shirts. And so I'm hoping it will be relevant as a movement building book at a time when we're all looking for ways to raise our voice and to make a difference.
You can find the book and you can find out more about Paul at paulrice.org. I want to thank you so much for being with us here on Down to Earth.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation.
You've been listening to Down to Earth. We would love it if you would support this program, which you can do by going to patreon.com/down-to-earth planet to plate, where you can sign up for as little as $3. Patreon is Patreon. And also please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The Quivira Coalition is a not-for-profit and a community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to regenerative practices that produce healthy food, support meaningful livelihoods, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira. And finally, this show is a production with the Radio Cafe. You can check out radiocafe.org to hear back episodes of this show and also find all kinds of other shows on a wide variety of topics as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.